So, all right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this session of environmental justice. My name is Alan Baycock, now with the EPA as one of the environmental justice coordinators, and Ruben Mujica Hernandez is also on the line, and he is the other EJ coordinator. And together we'll share an overview of the environmental justice program at EPA. And then because the grants for environmental justice are competitive grants, Terry Redow will be sharing some tips and helping to create some more opportunities for folks to get funding through environmental justice. And with that, so environmental justice is really looking at the needs of communities as they have been through and have been overburdened in a lot of ways with pollution. And a lot of the pollution issues have been developed over time, and not just were they just a natural occurrence, but really a predestined creation based off of policies and things that have happened. And so part of what we're looking to do is help to overcome and to provide opportunity for communities to be able to strengthen their ability to not be living within an overburdened pollution issues. And as we look at environmental justice, one thing to recognize, and I know we certainly do, is that even though the environmental justice movement started in the 1980s, as tribes, we've definitely seen a lot of environmental justice issues since our time with people coming in, colonizers. And I know this is just a picture of my own tribe and us in the Owens Valley and dealing with our neighbors to the south, Los Angeles. This is a picture of Owens Lake from overhead, and it's a drained lake as the Los Angeles Aqueduct moved water from the Owens Valley and essentially from Owens Lake to be able to move into LA. And it's created its own injustices within our area that we continue to deal with. One thing about environmental justice and the environmental movements is they're a little different. Environmental movement, a lot of the organizations like the Sierra Club, the Audubon Society, the Wilderness Society, they're really, the leadership tends to be white and focus then on those issues that that population would be interested in, whereas the environmental justice movement is largely created out of those communities that have been impacted by pollution, and a large percentage of those communities are people of color. And so the organizations then and those that are working on behalf are really working off of a model, a social justice model, to say, our community is dealing with this issue, with this pollution, and so they're a little bit different in their makeup between the environmental and the environmental justice movements. I'm going to pass it over to Ruben, who's going to share a little bit more about the origins of things and where we are with environmental justice at EPA.
Thank you, Alan. Hi, everyone. So my name is Ruben Mujica Hernandez. And so as Alan was mentioning, environmental injustices have been occurring for a very long time. But I want to go back, not too far back, to a time that really brought environmental justice to the forefront. So the movement that Alan was talking about. So let's go back to 1982 to a rural low-income community that was predominantly Black in Warren County, North Carolina. So this place is actually recognized as the birth of a political movement. So specifically that movement being environmental justice. So in the 1980s, the state government had decided that the county would make a perfect home for 6,000 truckloads of soil laced with toxic PCBs. However, the community did not stand for this, and they actually fought back. Their fight eventually made it to a national stage. To a national stage. So what had occurred was that the dump trucks first came to Warren County, somewhere near a community called Afton, around September of 1982. And the residents were frustrated and furious that the trucks were coming in because the state and the local officials had completely dismissed their concerns for PCBs leaching into drinking water supplies in the area, which was their only drinking water supplies. So what the residents did is they stopped the trucks from entering by laying down on the roads that led to the landfill. And what followed that was 6 weeks of marches and nonviolent protests and more than 500 arrests for the people who were participating in the protests. And so that was actually one of the first arrests occurring in US history over the sitting of a landfill. So the people of Warren County unfortunately ultimately lost the battle. The toxic waste did eventually get deposited into the landfill, but their story, so one of community strength driven by love for the necessity to protect their homes from toxic assault, drew national media attention and fired the imagination of people across the country and who had lived through similar injustices, because this isn't the only and the first time that it had happened. It had been occurring for years and years in a lot of communities, specifically communities of color, indigenous communities, tribal communities. But this is when it finally really it came to light. And so this is why they say that it was like the movement of environmental justice, where people coming together to fight back. And it is considered a major milestone in the national movement for environmental justice. So those are the two photos that you can see from the event. So also something to highlight as part of the EJ movement is this key study that was published in 1987 by the United Church of Christ. And so the Toxic Waste and Race Report is a landmark study that demonstrated the direct correlation between the placement of toxic waste facilities in communities of poverty and or of color. The first report was groundbreaking study for which ideas like environmental racism actually came to light. And it should be noted that there are follow-up reports published by the UCC that further proves that environmental injustices exist in many communities, specifically low-income and communities of color. There are two takeaways that I just wanted to highlight, that though there are many from this report, and one is that 3 out of every 5 Black and Hispanic Americans lived in communities with uncontrolled toxic waste sites. And also approximately half of all Asian Pacific Islanders and American Indians lived in communities with uncontrolled waste sites. And lived as in, because this report was back in 1987. But as you can see, there are a lot of follow-up reports that still prove that these things are still happening. And then, so also wanted to highlight, so the Executive Order 12898, so this it's for federal actions. It calls for federal actions to address environmental injustice in minority populations and low-income populations. It was issued by President Clinton in 1994, and its purpose is to focus federal attention on environmental and human health effects of federal actions on minority and low-income populations with the goal of achieving environmental protections for all communities. So what essentially is that executive order is directing agencies like EPA to, 1, identify and address disproportionately high and adverse human health or environmental effects of their actions on minority and low-income populations to the greatest extent practicable and permitted by law. Also to develop strategies for implementing environmental justice, which a lot of agencies do have branches for EJ and offices and such. And then of course, to promote non-discrimination in federal programs that affect, for us here at EPA, specifically human health and the environment, as well as provide minority and low-income communities access to public information and public participation, which we'll learn a little bit more what that means when we say public information, public participation. And now, Alan.
Oh, is this me? Okay.
Oh, sorry.
At EPA, there is a definition that has been put together to be able to help move this action forward, and it's really defined as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, and then it's regardless of race and color. You can read through the definition, but the two terms of importance really are fair treatment and meaningful involvement. In that, that for fair treatment, it's looking at this concept of disproportionate share of the negative environmental consequences. So it's looking at and making sure that across the board there is fair treatment to all people, regardless of where they might live, and regardless of what their conditions or who they might be is. Over time, there have been policies that have been put in place which have unfortunately pushed pollution or polluting industry into certain locations, which has created overburdened communities. And so we're looking at overcoming that systemic nature of moving into communities or placing people within communities that have pollution issues. And so this concept of fair treatment is one that is really of high importance to be able to look at equity and justice for all. And part of being able to have that fair treatment is ensuring that there is meaningful involvement with communities. And so suitable outreach, opportunity, recognition, consideration. So it's not just sitting at the table, not just having a public forum, but really ensuring that the involvement of people, the engagement of people results in changes, results in listening and helping communities to again have that fair treatment that we had discussed earlier. There is the definition, the broad definition of environmental justice within EPA, but then there was also created a specific policy on environmental justice for working with tribes and indigenous peoples, and that policy it affirmed EPA's commitment to working with tribes and indigenous peoples, as well as had 17 additional principles that were put in place to be able to support what that looks like on the ground. And in that should mention that it's not just about federally recognized tribes that this policy is for, but also indigenous peoples. And so there's a much broader definition than typically what EPA works with tribes on, in that it includes state recognized tribes, indigenous and tribal community organizations, individual members of federally recognized tribes. And so it's much broader than the typical government to government relationship that the EPA has with tribes. And so this today is just really a quick overview of things, and I should share that we can put this. Maybe I'll send an email to Mervyn if people are interested. There will be a webinar later on from the Office of Environmental Justice, which is located in Washington, to be able to share more in depth about this particular policy. So stay tuned for that coming up next.
All right. Yeah, so I am going to go ahead and start talking about funding opportunities for environmental justice work that we provide here at EPA. So there's actually 3 different programs that we have for which we support environmental justice efforts within our region. And so the first one I want to talk about is EJ Small Grants Program, which we also just call it EJSG. And so this is roughly around 30,000. And I say roughly because it can change depending on the funding that we get, um, uh, this funding that we end up receiving. So the last awards that were given out were 30K. But again, that could change. So this is to support and empower communities working on solutions for local environmental and public health issues. So for this kind of grant, because it's 30,000, it's really to kind of supplement or help support some sort of local project that an NGO or a tribe wants to work on, and yeah, so it's just more for like local health and environmental issues tied to environmental justice. And then we have the EJCPS, which is the Environmental Justice Collaborative Problem Solving Program. And it's a problem-solving cooperative agreement. So this is a cooperative agreement, which I think most tribes may be familiar with, like the GAP program, where this is a lot more of involvement with EPA. And so this program is, it's to support, build grantees and to build collaborative partnerships to help them understand and address environmental and public health concerns in their communities. So this is a much larger grant. It's roughly around 120,000. And again, I say roughly because it does depend on the funding that we get from OJ, but the last awards were for 120, so that could go up, that hopefully go up. But if not, it'd be around 120. And so this does call for a lot of partnerships in a much of a larger scale project tied to environmental justice, where it's working with, partnering up with the community specifically. So the project does involve partnering with the community and then having other partnerships with other programs or NGOs to solve a specific environmental justice issue within a community. And then there's also the State Environmental Justice Cooperative Agreement Program. And so this is to support and or create model activities that lead to measurable environmental and public health results in communities disproportionately burdened by environmental harms and risks. So we just closed out this the award process for this, and those grantees have been notified. And this award was for 200,000. And this program this award isn't always available. I think the last time was a while when they had offered this specific grant program. But we're very excited to have brought it back. And the award was for, again, 200,000. And this is usually for states, but tribes are eligible to, for states, local governments, and anyone affiliated with a state local government, but tribes are also eligible. Tribal governments are also eligible to apply for this grant award. And one thing I wanted to highlight is that none of these funding opportunities are currently open. Like I just said, we did just close out the state SEJCA, the State Cooperative Agreement Program did just close. However, we are waiting, Alan and I are anxiously waiting to hear from OEJ about when the solicitations for the EJ Small Grant and then the EJ Collaborative Problem Solving Agreement will come out. And so we're hoping later this year. We're just kind of probably waiting on, other decisions to be made so that they'll let us know when. And we will make sure that that all of you on this call and the tribes are well aware of when these opportunities open up, so that everyone has a fair opportunity to apply in a timely manner. And we encourage you all to do so. They are competitive, but that's why we wanted to save the second portion of this presentation, which we have Carrie Reddle is going to be giving some really great tips for being competitive. And I strongly encourage everyone to take notes because they are very helpful tips. I also wanted to just bring a quick spotlight to the 2 awards. So we're very excited to have announced that Navajo Nation received this year's FY21 the EJ Collaborative Problem Solving. So they're going to be using the funds to work with the existing NFPI Community Advisory Group to develop training to protect community from potential health effects from a site in the area. And then also, we're very excited that Region 9 was chosen for 2 different grants for the SECHCO award, because every region usually got about one, some regions didn't get any, but we were lucky to get 2, and one of them was Coyote Valley, and they will be creating a disaster resiliency plan and emergency operations training program with this grant, the one that was $200,000. So we're very excited, so we really encourage everyone here to apply and just go for it.
Yeah, and just to note that Region 9 has been pretty successful in being able to receive these environmental justice grants, and particularly so Coyote Valley within the state EJ cooperative agreement, they're the only tribe that was selected to receive this funding. So so it's great that we're able to in Region 9 get these funds out to communities within our region, and really do want to be able to support tribes in seeing how we can continue to do more work with environmental justice funding in your communities. Also, just to note that the state EJ cooperative agreement, it was before for tribes and states and local governments, but then at the last minute, they had opened up the door as well to the state recognized tribes, which I know we don't necessarily have state recognized tribes in Region 9. And so we are trying to help change some of the language there to broaden it further. But at least it opens up the opportunity for more tribal communities that are having issues to be able to look at overcoming some of those issues with some of this funding available. And then let's see, so here is Ruben and my contact information. We're certainly available to help with any questions you might have. We're looking to do a couple more environmental justice calls with tribes to be able to share more, to have a discussion around things and topic areas. And so we'll be developing that more over the next couple months, but we definitely want to strengthen our involvement with the concerns that you have. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen so we can be able to hear from Terry. And then at the very end, we will take any questions. I couldn't see in the chat if we had anything yet, but at the very end, we'll make sure that we get to any questions there.
Thank you.
Okay, good morning. Can you hear me? Okay, wonderful. So Manahu, my name is Terry Red Owl. I'm the Executive Director of the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission in Bishop, California. And I'm going to talk about competitive grant writing. I want to thank Alan Baycock and Ruben Mojica Hernandez for inviting me to contribute to this session today, and hopefully it's helpful to you. Okay, so when you have an idea or a project that you want to do and that you need funding for, the first thing you're going to do is start doing research. And what I mean by that is you're going to start looking for opportunities, and you want opportunities that align with your mission, with the mission of your tribe or your organization that you work for. And you want to make sure that the grant that you're going to apply for really does align with that mission, and that it doesn't take time away from reaching your programming goals. Because sometimes, you know, we might go after money just because it's available, but it's not going to benefit anybody if it really takes your focus and your time away from what you're truly trying to accomplish. And then along with this, it's really important to make sure that you're not completely planning your program to suit grant requirements. Instead, you want to tailor your plans to make sure that your ideas that you have already suit the grant requirements. And so an example of this would be, let's say you're working towards food sovereignty, and you notice that a lot of the fruit trees on tribal member assignments are overgrown and they need to be pruned in order to start producing. And so that's your goal, is to prune all of the fruit trees on the reservation. However, the grant you're going for doesn't allow that. And so but maybe they allow training. And so what you might want to do is put on these workshops on tribal member assignments, teaching people how to prune their fruit trees. And as you're doing that, you're building up a group of people that can move from one house or home site to the next, pruning fruit trees. And the workshops, the training that you're doing is actually pruning fruit trees, but you're doing a training. Another thing to look at is, can you meet the application deadline? So if there's a really tight deadline coming up and there's a lot of work that's going to be required in putting the application together, and you're not going to be able to meet that deadline, it's not worth the time that you spend in trying to meet the deadline. And then you want to make sure that the work that you're trying to accomplish can be done within the specific time period. So, some grants have a 1 year, a 2 year, maybe even a 6 month or a 90 day. So know what that is and make sure that you can complete the work within that time period. The other thing is, it's super important to get to know the grantor or the entity that you're going to apply to. And again, make sure that their interest matches well with your tribe or organization's mission. Make sure that you follow their guidelines. That's very important. The funders are going to be looking at what your mission is. They're going to ask you to provide a mission statement, and they want to know, is it worthwhile? Does it align with their grant giving? They want to make sure that your operations are sustainable and your projects and plans for the grant funds are logical and make sense. So, just going back, the sustainable part, it's really important when you're going for competitive grants that you can demonstrate that, because funders don't want to feel obligated or that they're the only source of funding that your organization is relying upon. The other thing on getting to know your grantor, once again, look at their grant giving history. Who has received grants in the past? What kind of projects do they typically support? What are their political and social values? And who are the key decision makers? So you want to make sure that you're not putting something into your application or your proposal that doesn't align with their social values. And then one thing that is really important and can go a long way is understanding who your advocates are, within an organization. So these are people that you want to build relationships with. They're people that will assist you personally in helping you to understand what's going on and finding money for you. They champion your cause. And so, an example would be if you have a really good relationship with somebody, maybe there's some year-end money that becomes available, and they know that you're trying to, repair your irrigation system, and there might be a smaller pot of money, and they'll say, hey, apply for this. You can, apply it towards, the bigger project that you're trying to accomplish. So it's important to develop those relationships, know your grantor, and find people that will champion your cause. Another thing, when you're looking at grant specifics, I can't emphasize this enough, is making sure that you read the funding opportunity or requests for applications thoroughly. You want to pay attention to timelines and key deadlines, but also to make sure that you're following their guidelines and you're answering all the questions and that's required. I highly recommend that you participate in webinars. If they have a request for proposals webinar, participate in that. You'll get a lot of really good information and tips and understanding of what the funding entity wants to fund this year. And that can change from year to year. Another thing to pay attention to is, does the grantor require or want a letter of inquiry first? Do they want a proposal, or do they want a full-blown application? A lot of times they're going to ask you to submit a letter of inquiry first, and then they'll determine does this align with what we want to do? And they might invite you to develop a proposal or an application after that. So make sure you understand that, because you don't want to spend a lot of time in putting together a full-blown application if all they want is a letter of inquiry first. Again, look at what the eligibility requirements are to apply for that money and to receive an award. You want to look at and pay attention to what the allowable uses of funds are, and also what the unallowable uses are. You know, sometimes you might assume something, you can do something because it's allowable, but there might be a small detail of what you want to do that isn't unallowable. And so make sure you understand that. And it's important to know what the factors for awards are and what the scoring criteria is. That way you can make sure that you strengthen those points in your application or your proposal. And also understand what mandatory documentation is required, and look at things such as, is there a specific language that they want to see in a resolution? Do they need a resolution? So those are the types of things that you're going to want to understand when you're looking at the grant specifics. I recommend creating a checklist. You can put this in a spreadsheet or, you know, word processing program, but, you know, go through and make sure that you have a checklist so that you don't forget to leave off a piece of pertinent information or documentation that the funder wants. Once you've done your research, you start planning and organizing. And here you're going to organize all the data that you need, you know, for your application or your proposal. So you'll start gathering up these materials. It could be budgets, it could be audit reports, indirect cost agreements. Maybe it's your governing documents, statistics. That's very important to have statistics sometimes. Past accomplishments, letters of support, resolutions. Again, going back to what are the questions that need to be answered in this funding opportunity. Reach out to your grantors, to the funding entities, the foundations, whoever you're applying to ask clarifying questions that you might have. Not all of them allow you to do that, but a lot of them do. And also, if they do, like I said earlier, a webinar, they'll provide you with contact information for more information. You can also talk to past grant recipients about their experiences and what helped them to get funded. So all this is really useful information when you're preparing to write your application or your proposal. And one of the things I wanted to emphasize here is don't delay. So if you're going to need a letter of support or you're going to need a resolution, you know, that takes time to get. So try to get it earlier in the process rather than later. And then now that you've got your materials together, you're ready to apply and start writing. So grant writing, you know, I look at it as, you know, telling your story and selling your product, or your project, I should say. So you want to write your application. You want to make sure you use clear and bold language. You want to be descriptive but specific, so don't get too far out there. Make your language straightforward. Make it as persuasive as possible, because you're trying to get yourself funded over, you know, maybe hundreds of other applicants. You want to stay concise and focused, and no character limitations for online applications. That's very important. Most of the time there'll be a specific word count, but sometimes it's a character count. And I remember I had was writing this grant, and I was paying attention to the word count because I knew there was limitations, but I didn't look at it closely enough, and it was actually a character limitation. So every space, comma, period, letter, you know, counts. And so I had to go back through and really tighten things up, and I wasted a lot of time doing that. So if I would have been like more attentive to those details, I would have known that there was a character limitation rather than a word limitation in that online application. And then again, provide relevant details whenever you can, and support your plans with data. I was having a conversation with Alan and Ruben, and I believe, you know, they were saying that what helped get some of the grants funded that they've looked at was having that supportive data backing up the plans of what they want to do. And then another thing that is important is really providing examples and stories of how your tribe or your organization has impacted your community. Something that you might want to do is look at, are there families or individuals that you've helped that would be willing to share their story or a quote? Personal stories about community impacts can be really persuasive, and also photographs, if you're allowed to use photographs. But again, remember that the primary focus is explaining the specifics of your project. So you want to be able to include this information, but don't get too far out there. And then again, most of these entities that you're going to apply to, they're going to want to know about your tribe, you know, what the organizational structure is. So be prepared to describe your leadership, including board members, what their roles are, what their backgrounds are. A lot of times organizational charts, these visuals are super helpful. They may not be required, but if you can, you know, attach it, it can be very helpful. And then they're also going to want to know, like, who are the team members that are going to be responsible for the project and for the grant administration? Do you have collaborators? If you have community collaborators, include information in your proposal about who these collaborators are and what they're going to bring to the table, because that really strengthens your application. And then, you know, once again, you have to demonstrate that there is project oversight and there's going to be accountability. I want to go back to following directions. Very important to follow the grantor's instructions, their guidelines, and their formats. Grantors want to review uniform proposals. So a lot of times, you know, they may get, you know, 100 applications or more. And if they're going through and they're reviewing and something isn't following the format, making it easier for them to review, you might have the best project in the world, but they could automatically just reject your proposal, your application, because you didn't follow their guideline and their format. An example would be like looking like, do they want an organizational budget in addition to your grant budget? So you might think, oh, I'm just submitting a project budget, but they might want to know what your entire budget is. So make sure that you know that by following their directions. Sometimes they may want, you know, an organizational budget and your expenses to date included. So understand that, know that, follow the directions so that your hard work doesn't just automatically get rejected. And then moving into budgeting, your budget really should stand on its own. It should be able to answer questions about your grant proposal or application. You want to pick a tool to use, such as an Excel spreadsheet, and make sure that the numbers in your columns are visible and that they do not get cut off. So I always use text wrap because there's nothing worse than having your numbers cut off. And another point is, if your budget runs into multiple pages, you want to make sure that you have column headings on every single page, because it's really, for a reviewer, it's very hard to follow a budget if you don't have the column headings and you have to scroll back up to the previous page to look to see what you're looking at. You might get lost. And then in your budget, you're going to detail the cost of your project. You're going to show the funder exactly what their money will pay for. You want to list other sources of income for costs that may not be covered by the grant. And again, this goes back to showing, you know, how you're collaborating, that you're not relying just on this one grant to complete your project or what you're trying to accomplish. And then if there's a cost share requirement, or if it's encouraged, you know, and you don't have the actual cash and they allow in-kind contributions, then you're going to want to know what your donor and volunteer engagement rates are for in-kind contributions. And you want to make sure that the figures that you're using are reasonable and that they make sense. You're going to categorize your costs in a way that makes sense, and with the goal being of illustrating to the funder what it takes to successfully complete your project. And use real numbers. You want to get quotes from vendors, contractors. You can go online and find pricing online, but you don't want to write something in and then discover that you under budgeted budgeted and you don't have enough money to do what you had intended to do, or that you're overestimating and then you're out of alignment with what other people are putting in their proposals and applications. And make sure that your numbers add up. You want to double and triple check your figures. Be realistic about the amount of money that you're requesting. Stay within the budget guidelines. They may only allow a maximum amount for supplies or indirect. Maybe your indirect rate is 24%, but you're only allowed to claim 15% on this particular grant. So you got to stay within those guidelines and make sure that your costs tie in with your narrative. And again, your budget is really telling the story and supporting what you wrote in your application. On the budget narrative, this is your opportunity to explain line items and make the clear connection between the budget and the project goals and objectives. It's normally done in paragraph form. And again, being thorough in this narrative will build credibility with the reviewers. Your language should convey a sense of good investment. Foundations in particular want to make sure that they're putting their money to really good use and that you have the most cost-effective solution to taking care of a problem or a project. It gives readers and reviewers the confidence that you did research and that your costs are reasonable and well thought out. Once you've gathered all your information, you've written your project proposal or application, you're ready to submit. And so before you do that, you want to do a final check. You want to read through everything again. You want to pay attention to the details. You want to make sure that you follow directions. So go back and look at the guidance or the funding opportunity announcement. Double and triple check your spelling and your grammar. I think it really turns a lot of reviewers off if they find a lot of these common errors, simple errors. So make sure that everything is correct. And then I highly recommend having other people review and edit your documents. When we look at something too long, we tend to get tunnel vision and our eyes will skip over things that we've read and read and read over and over. So it's very beneficial to have others reviewing and editing. And once again, make sure your Excel formulas are correct. Sometimes you might change something or add a column or a row or something that doesn't get included in that calculation, and that can throw everything off. I recommend double checking everything with a calculator, like going through and just adding everything up. Secondly, with a calculator, it can be tedious, but it's very helpful to make sure that your figures are correct. Go back to your checklist that you created to ensure that you have all of your required documentation and materials attached to the application. Don't forget to include the contact names, the titles, how to get a hold of these people, email addresses, phone numbers, and then be mindful of deadlines and make sure you submit well before the deadline. This is especially true for online applications. You may, if you wait to the day of, you might end up having internet accessibility issues that will cause delays and cause you to miss the deadline. And you can't get a hold of the funder later on the next day or hours later and say, oh, I'm really sorry, but my internet was down. They're not going to care because, this opportunity may have been open for months. So you should have got it in well before the day of. And then once you've submitted, you want to make sure that you get confirmation that your application has been received. Normally something will pop up on your screen saying, thank you, this is confirmation or, whatever. I do a print screen of that and it'll say an email will be forthcoming. So I always look for those emails too, but I also do a print screen and I save that. And then if the funder, the foundation, the grantor allows you to, send them a follow-up email or call them and thank them for the opportunity to apply. And then once you've applied and you find out whether or not you are funded, Sometimes grantors will provide you with an opportunity to let you know why you were or you were not funded. If they do, take them up on this opportunity, because it will give you tips and pointers that will help you with future applications and proposals. And not just with their foundation, but maybe with other pots of money as well. So this is the grant life cycle. Everybody's, pretty much aware of this. We talked about identifying funding, developing a proposal, submitting a proposal. There's, other steps to this cycle, but the one thing that I just wanted to touch on really quickly before I conclude my presentation today is the importance of sharing your results. A lot of times we don't do that. It's important that your community knows and understands the work that you're doing, and that the outside world does as well, because that's going to increase your chances of getting funding later on. And I don't mean just writing, your final closeout report, to the funding agency. It's putting it out there, in social media and wherever, for everybody to see those results. And sometimes we have a tendency to feel like, we're patting ourselves on the back if we do this. And most of us don't like to do that, but you're really not. What you're doing here is creating opportunities for future funding. So don't be shy about sharing your results. And so mana hobu, that means thank you in our Paiute language. That concludes my presentation today, but we do have, I believe, some time for questions.